Lockie. So today I'm going to be talking about the Riverland Working on Country program and an evaluation of the social outcomes from the program. So not so much about the on-ground outcomes, which we often do, but some of the social outcomes which we probably very rarely do with some of the work that we do. So I'll talk about a little bit of background on the WOC project, so WOC being Working on Country, some of the project activities that the participants get involved in, and the evaluation technique which we used, which is MSC, or Most Significant Change Evaluation Technique. And then I'll talk about some of the outcomes from the evaluation, the stories, the analysis that we did, and some of the recommendations that came out of the project and what's happened since. Just very briefly, the Riverland Working on Country project is an Aboriginal Ranger program. So it started in 2010. It actually stemmed from the Aboriginal Learning on Country team, which actually started in Cowpram in 2009. So it was just a change in the funding source that rolled over into a Working on Country program. But they're Aboriginal Rangers that work on site, based in Cowpram, up in the Riverland. I'll show a map very shortly. It's funded by the Australian Government and that funding comes through the SA Murray-Darling Basin NRM Board, and then is through Australian Landscapes Trust, who manage Cowpram Station. I'm going to flip through that. I'll just briefly, back in 2009 when the region was doing its regional NRM planning, the Riverland Aboriginal NRM group determined it was really important for the NRM plan to recognise the importance of raising awareness of Aboriginal culture and increasing participation of Aboriginal people in NRM and protecting Aboriginal heritage. And that flowed on to the creation of the ALOC program. So Cowpram is northwest of Renmark, very large property, over 300,000 hectares, and very important properties as well. So Ramsar wetlands, large areas of mallee, lots of threatened species, many culturally significant species, and very important cultural sites. And the WOC project activities themselves. So these are the activities that the participants, the Aboriginal Ranger participants, get involved in: propagation, revegetation, controlling weeds and feral animals, pigs, goats, rabbits, foxes. Fence construction and maintenance. They also do some monitoring of water quality and monitoring invasive aquatic weeds. Heritage monitoring and management. They also do the annual mallee fowl surveys on site up there, and get involved in lots of different other biodiversity surveys and monitoring things like turtle monitoring, those sorts of things. Another really important part of the program is gaining skills. So it is really a training program for the participants. They get involved in, they sort of learn on the job, but they also get accreditation in certain things as well. So they're all currently doing conservation land management as well, different levels of certificates or diploma. But they also might get licences so that where they can make sure that they can actually function on site doing, using some of the heavy vehicles, that sort of thing. And the team will also host visitors, and tourism is a big part for Cowpram Station as well. So like I said before, these are all very easy outputs to measure. We can measure how many rabbit warrens were fumigated, how much revegetation, how many hectares, kilometres of plants, those sorts of things. But what we very rarely do is actually measure the social outcomes from these programs. And that's where Most Significant Change technique comes in. Basically, it's a technique that was developed by Rick Davies and Jess Dart, and the team that was involved in this evaluation did some training over in Melbourne to get ourselves familiar with the technique. It's essentially a qualitative and participatory approach to evaluation. So it's not a typical quantitative approach, nor does it set a hypothesis. which seeks to determine whether that hypothesis is proved or not. It's more a very open-ended evaluation, which is really good in the sense that it will almost accept any sort of outcome that comes out of the process. So it can be a very open-ended outcome that you get from it, or unexpected outcomes, probably more to the point. But it's probably two major parts to the process. One is collection of stories from the field. So I'll talk about the actual process that we went through, but collection of stories from the field, and then a systematic selection of the story that depicts the most significant change by a group of stakeholders that actually assess those stories, or they review those stories. So for us, the first step for us was to identify some domains of change. These were the things that we thought we wanted to try and identify outcomes from the project. And there were three things: changes in the participants' lives, their families, and as well as changes for the overall Aboriginal community in the Riverland. So one of our project officers, Chris Coolmotry, based in Berry, interviewed participants. He interviewed their family members and interviewed people that work alongside the participants as well. So there's a total of 13 interviews. From that, we gathered 21 stories. So I'll just go back. So from the 21 stories, those 21 stories, so they were interviewed. That interview was transcribed, and from the transcription, a short story. So we took out, it's all word for word, but we took out the main parts that identified change and brought them into a small story. And it was all I suppose, very formal process. Same questions were asked of each participant. There were permissions sought for all the participants as well. And then it went into a workshop situation where we brought in a range of stakeholders who were closely related to the project. So they all had I suppose they had a vested interest in the project in a lot of ways, but that's a good thing because they took the outcomes and they could use the outcomes from the process. They were split up into 3 small groups. Each small group reviewed 7 stories each, and they had to decide which story showed the most significant change out of the project for them. And then from that, each group reported back to the main group, and the main group went through a bit of a voting system to determine which story was the best of all. And for me, actually, some of the best parts of this is the process just as much as the outcome. So it's bringing people together, they get to read all the stories. It's actually a very emotional process as well because there's lots of really personal detail in some of the stories, which is really, so that's why I say it's good connection between the participants and the people that are working alongside them as well. Okay, so some of the outcomes. So that we didn't actually come up with one story. We ended up with three most significant stories. My kids are proud of me. She said I was the inspiration, and from a mother's eyes. And this is one of the stories that came up the most. So just very quickly, I'll read just a little bit. I got involved in the WOC program because number one, I needed to work to support my family, and number two, there was an opportunity for me to get involved in growing bush tucker and educating kids. If I had not been employed on the WOC team, I would have been slogging my guts out in a packing shed or picking oranges or something that is mindless, a boring job, just a robot packing or sorting fruit and things like that. So this is pretty indicative of a lot of the stories that came out of the process. And from the workshop found that this story, this is what it finds in terms of most significant change. This is a story about a WOC ranger that has been given the opportunity to follow a passion and connect to her culture while becoming self-sufficient and able to provide a better quality of life for her family. She's become an achiever and leader for her community. Her children are proud of her, so showing there's a strong connection to the family and the impact on the family life is there. It's a story that anyone, Aboriginal or not, can relate to because it's about being valued, having the opportunity to achieve, the worth of contributing to society and the social and financial benefits of work. Let's flip through. So these are the other 2 that came up as the most significant. Then we did a secondary analysis of all the workshop outcomes. And this took into account all of the stories, the whole 21 stories, and it used a process of thematic coding and I suppose it's a frequency or an abundance sort of measure of those themes that came up in all the stories. And you can see that some of the major changes for participants were around pride in themselves, pride from their family, building ambition, their capacity was increased, they became leaders in their community, and they had a greater connection to the country. So these are some of the really key outcomes, social outcomes from the project. We also did secondary analysis on, I should say, other than finding changes for participants themselves, family and their community, we also looked at, they also were asked questions about what could be improved in the program and what is working well, what could be improved, and what about the future. So we also had some findings. So developing the capacity of the participants and meaningful employment were the things that are working well. What's not working so well, identifying opportunities to build capacity for leadership roles and lack of career planning. And out of that came a whole lot of recommendations. We formed a working group that is progressing these recommendations, and really importantly, what's happened since is we have formed that working group that is progressing recommendations from the evaluation, but also two of the members now have their own small business. So they're still working within the WOC program, but they have I suppose a sideline activity which is their own business, which is doing well. And I think that's all I've got time for. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Phil, has anybody got any questions for Phil on his presentation?
Yeah, just wondering when you the stakeholders you brought together.
Yes.
What was the sort of cross section of those people for the discussions?
So we invited First Peoples of the River Murray and Mallee, so who are the traditional owners of the region. We didn't get as high participation in the workshop as we would have liked. So this is the workshop that we're talking about in terms of stakeholders involved in the workshop. We had people from the local Riverland NRM group, which is part of the NRM board. We had local staff, junior staff, and some other community members as well. And that's what I was saying about it actually created a great connection between the program and the Aboriginal Rangers and those people who were reading these stories and getting a real understanding about their background, why the program was really important and why it was important socially, not only to the environment but also socially. And those people, and that's why I was saying the process is actually just as important. Those people have gone away and they talk regularly about it, and they talk regularly about how great it was and what a great program this is in terms of improving these people's lives. So, really good.
Any more questions?
So the question was around, I think that I said we didn't have a great attendance of First Peoples at the workshop, and were there any barriers that we identified? No, I don't know the answer to that question. We had a number of people expected to come. I don't know actually, there may have been good reasons that they weren't able to attend. I don't have an answer to the question, sorry.
I reckon we've got time for one more question. Anybody's got one?
Could you talk a little bit to the advantage of this type of program working with Indigenous people for the NRM, for the environmental outcomes of management?
Yeah. So we actually have presented this to all of our teams within the region, SA Murray-Darling Basin. We've also presented this approach to it's Mensa, who I'm not involved in, but it's all the MERI or monitoring and evaluation project staff come together regularly in the state from the regions, and I suppose centrally as well, and we've presented to them as well about the use of this process more broadly. Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Thanks very much.